All right, we have continuing our series in John, so today it'll be John chapter 9, which says this. As he was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus answered. "This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. We must do the works of him who is sent while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After he said these things, he spit on the ground, made some mud from the saliva, and spread the mud on his eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So he left, washed, and came back seeing. His neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar said, "Isn't this the one who used to sit begging?" Some said, He's the one. Others were saying, "No, but he looks like him." He kept saying, I'm the one." So they asked him, "Then how were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So when I went and washed, I received my sight." "Where is he?" they asked. "I don't know," he said. They brought the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees. The day that Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes was a Sabbath. When the Pharisees asked him again how he received his, then the Pharisees asked him again how he received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," he told them. "I washed and I can see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath." But others were saying, "How can a sinful man perform such signs?" And there was division among them. Again, they asked the blind man, "What do you say about him since he opened your eyes?" "He's a prophet," he said. The Jews did not believe this about him, that he was blind and received sight, until they summoned the parents of the one who had received his sight. They asked them, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" "We know this is our son, and that he was born blind," his parents answered. But we don't know how he now sees, and we don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he's of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, since the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him as the Messiah, he would be banned from the synagogue. This is why his parents said, "He's of age, ask him." So a second time they summoned the man who had been blind and told him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "Whether or not he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I can see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" "I already told you," he said, "and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you?" They ridiculed him. "You're that man's disciple, but we're Moses' disciples. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but this man, we don't know where he's from." "This is an amazing thing," the man told them. "You don't know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything." "You were born entirely in sin," they replied, "and are you trying to teach us?" Then they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, and when he found him, he asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" he asked. Jesus answered, "You have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." "I believe, my Lord," he said, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and asked him, "We aren't blind too, are we?" "If you are blind," Jesus told them, "you wouldn't have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." This is the word of God. You may be seated.
Trusting in Jesus gives and increases sight, while rejecting him increases blindness. That's what we're going to see in this passage today, that trusting in Jesus is going to be our main idea today, that trusting in Jesus gives and increases sight, while rejecting him increases blindness. You know, some years ago, I went on a mission trip to Zimbabwe, and we went to some remote village, and my job there, because we had traveled with an eye surgeon, my job was to hold some cards, starting with big letters, going down to some small letters, and try to figure out where people's sight was. And I would ask, is this better or is it worse? And some needed glasses, and they would provide glasses. They would actually collect glasses that you didn't want here in the United States, take them there, and they would give them glasses, and they would walk away instantly. They could see, but others, the surgeon would actually say to them, this one needs surgery. And the lens, we're not going to fix it. Something deeper had to change in order for them to be able to see. And here's what struck me, though. Every single one of those people needed help, and they had one thing in common. They couldn't come to us, and so we drove to a remote area, and we went to them. And in fact, that is our problem spiritually. We are born blind to Christ and his benefits, and we're unable to find God on our own. And often the most dangerous thing within us is that we claim we can already see. We claim we can already see fine, but yet this is where John 9 is. Jesus walks into John 9, and he shows us there's a story in here. A man born blind. He is born blind. This is not a case that needs glasses, but he needs something only God can do. And Jesus does it. But the healing of this man's eyes is really just a backdrop, because it's telling a story. Jesus declares something in this chapter. He says, I am the light of the world, and that light exposes everything. One blind man, we see there's an exposure of one blind man who actually moves from darkness, and he moves from darkness all the way to worship. And then we see the Pharisees, who are confident and religious, and they're certain that they can see perfectly, and they move from confidence to blindness. It's the same miracle, same Jesus, but opposite destinations because of what's happening on the inside. Here's the question that John forces us to consider this morning. Because of Jesus, is your life getting brighter or is it getting darker? Because of Jesus, which direction are you moving? And John 9 answers that with one clear truth. And this is once again the main idea, that trusting in Jesus gives and increases sight, and while rejecting him increases blindness. Rejecting him increases blindness. Trusting him actually increases sight. And that is what you're going to see in this text. There's a miracle that happens, and you see the blind man moving from where his sight is improving clearly, more and more clearly. And then you will see the Pharisees get their eyesight becomes more and more poor because they claim they already see. So here's the first thing that we're going to see here, that the light of the world comes to those who cannot come to him. The light of the world comes to those who cannot come to him. And we see this here, where as God showed up into a dark world, Jesus makes the first move towards the blind man, acting with the creative power of God, and he opens this man's eyes. And the disciples here, they see a problem. They see a problem, and Jesus sees a platform for God's glory. Look at verse 1. He says this, as he was passing by, he saw a man born like blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The historical background to this is that at every turn when they saw suffering, they thought the reason for that was actually sin. And at this point, they're trying to nail down, who is it that sinned? Is it this child? Is it him? Did he sin in his mother's womb, or is it his parents? Because all suffering was always referred to as a result of sin. They see a theological problem to explain. But Jesus sees a man in whom God's works are to be displayed. And we see Jesus saying here in verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Jesus answered, this came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. And that is, in Greek, we call it a purpose clause. So that God's works might be displayed. It's not a statement about suffering in general, but it is a statement about this man at this moment, in this encounter with the light of the world. Jesus places the man's condition emphatically in the hands of God, and he says this was designed so that we would intersect and you would see a bigger truth here, that I am the light of the world. And we see Jesus acts as the light of the world, bringing light into darkness, as he had claimed in John chapter 8, I am the light of the world. Now he is doing it and he's demonstrating it. Look at verse 4. We must do the works of him who sent me. And while it is day, night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. And day and night is usually a contrast on two levels in the book of John. Historically, it's pointing to the urgency of Jesus' ministry before the cross. He has to fulfill everything God has sent him to do before the cross. But then if you zoom out and you look at the book of John, it's speaking about the fact that the light of the world came into the world. The light was entering into darkness, and darkness could not even understand it at all. Jesus is that light. And John 9 is showing how that light enters into our lives. Jesus is the light of the world, bringing light into darkness. And this is not this. And Jesus is saying here, I am going to urgently demonstrate what the Father sent me to do for the whole world. And not only in this moment, but for even the time to come where we are even today. And we see Jesus, it says this in verse 6, after this he said these things, he spit on the ground and he made some mud from saliva and he spread the mud on his eyes and he said to him, go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. And there's a play of words here. The sent one is actually the one who's sending him to go to the pool. That means that's called sent. So he left and he washed. He came back seeing. And I want you to see, probably like if you miss this verse here, you've missed almost everything in this text. Because the mud here, made from saliva and ground, echoes creation, the creation account. In Genesis 2:7, where he takes like mud and he works it and he makes it to man and he breathes into it and it becomes a living soul. But that living soul had eyes, and these eyes were not there since birth. And we see here the moment is not between the miracle worker and this man who's born blind. It is between the Creator and his creature. There is nothing that was made apart from him, John 1 says. So the very one who could create eyes and who knew how to create eyes. Today, eye surgeons spend the rest of their lives trying to perfect sight, but the one who has Vision 2020, who knew how to actually make eyes, he makes them. He just spits in there. Like, I'm telling you, spit and mud. Like, try it out today and see what happens. For you, spit and mud is going to just turn into that, just spit and mud. But for him, he can make a perfect sight out of that. That is the Jesus you and I worship, church. That right? And the mud points back to creation. The Creator is giving sight to his creature. And we see this. And I want you to look at this as grace coming to this man. The man did not ask. He could not find his way. He was found by Jesus. And we see this, that grace precedes anything that happens in our lives. Jesus finds him. Just like us riding into these remote parts of Africa, we went to them. And that's why we ground this in our first truth here, that the light of the world comes to those who cannot come to him. If you find yourself blind this morning and you are stuck in a place where there is no light at all, you are the candidate. Jesus has come for you this morning. I remember later that week when we're at this mission trip, we visited a grandmother. And this story changed my life. Like, we visited a grandmother who had cataract surgery, and then they were removing the band-aids and all those things, and they put new glasses on her the first time. And I remember she jumped up and she started ululating and she started singing and she started dancing. And the next thing she asked for a Bible. And she opens this Bible and she opens and she starts reading, and she says that, like, for the last I don't know how many years, the Bible's been getting read to me, and for once in my life, I can now read the Word of God for myself. And I was amazed at the fact that the first thing, as you can see, she wants to see more and more of the Word of God. Right. And it is this truth that Jesus comes. And he is gracious to find us in our blindness and comes and he gives us sight. How is this meant to change? Like, how is this meant to influence our minds? We need to always remember that grace is prior. That this is not a story about a man finding Jesus, but about Jesus finding the man who could not find him. And so even this morning, this should produce in us rest. The security of your faith does not rest in the strength of your seeking him. It rests in the certainty of the fact that he meets us where we are. But when he meets us where we are, church, he does not leave us where we are. He transforms us. Spit and mud can transform into like a cornea and then eyes, and for the first time, because I can imagine what it was like for him to see trees. He had heard about trees, but he can see them and see the beauty of the world. And this is the work of Jesus. He meets us where we are. And so what does this mean for us? Stop waiting until you have it together. Grace doesn't work that way. Stop waiting until you figured it out. Grace doesn't work that way. Obey the light you have. And what I love about this man Is that like, man, I'm like, bro, don't touch me. What is that you're putting in my face? What is it? And he doesn't say anything. And he's told, walk towards the pool and go and wash. He obeys. And he goes and he washes. And he says he comes back seeing. Obey the light you have. Jesus, like the blind man who went and washed. The question here is, where in your life right now are you waiting to have it together before you respond to Jesus? Maybe let me ask you even another question. What would it look like for you to simply obey the next thing he has told you before you fully understand it? Like, there's no context for spit and mud. Like, it's hard to understand. What are you doing here? Are we just playing with mud again? Mud pies? What's happening? But he obeys. And he gains sight. Oh, that I pray that you and I would simply obey him in that way, and we would find sight in him who meets us where we are. I know probably you think maybe just you came this morning because you planned very well and all those things. No, this is God. He planned for you to be here so that he can offer you sight. Would you take it this morning? Is your life brighter or is it darker as a result of Jesus' presence in your life? Light has come. Now, every person in the chapter here must respond either with trust or rejection. And let us look at the man first. And we see this is my second point, that trust in Jesus produces sight that keeps growing. Trust in Jesus produces sight that keeps growing. The blind man sees increasingly clearly, and every step of trust, however small, however costly, moves him further into the light until he arrives at full confession and worship. Where am I seeing this in the text? Like, look at the beginning of this man's journey. Like, Jesus meets him and then puts mud on him, and he comes back seeing. If you go to the same story, like in the book of Mark, it says he saw partially. Look at what's happening here. Look at verse 11. They ask him, how is it that you can see? And in verse 11, it says, he answered, the man called Jesus, made mud and spread it on my eyes, and he told me, go to Siloam and wash. And so when I went, I washed, and I received my sight. The text says, what does he say about Jesus? The man called Jesus. The name, and it reflects, like, it's the language here reflects genuine unfamiliarity. He knows there is someone called Jesus who told him to go, and this is not false modesty. It is an actual starting point, a minimum knowledge, but like coupled with maximum obedience, where he goes and he washes. But who is it that told him? It's just a man called Jesus. That's what he's saying here. He begins with what he knows. But they put him under pressure. And as they put him under pressure, his confession begins to grow a little bit more. He can see clearly even more, right? Look at verse 17. They interrogate him. They take him to the Pharisees, and one of the prohibitions was that, like, you shouldn't pick up clay and make pottery at all, because Jesus had picked up mud. Then they say that he had worked. And then so as a result, they interrogate this man. They take him to the Pharisee under the pressure. Look at this in verse 17. Again, they ask the blind man, what do you say say about him since he opened your eyes? And look at what he says about him. At first, he was just a man called Jesus. But now he is a man from God. He is, what does he say? He is a prophet, he said. Right. He is a prophet. And that word prophet is actually just like, if you look at the definition of that, it's someone sent from God. He's recognizing that there's actually just like a little bit something deeper. This is not just a man. This is someone sent from God. And you see, even the more they press him, the clearer he becomes. And there's a second interrogation again by the Pharisees. And look at verse, and he becomes more and more bolder still. He gives this confession when they press him even more. Look at verse 25. He says this. He answered when they press him again. He answered, whether or not he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know is that I was what? Blind, but now I see. And he is being pressed and faced with repeated questions. He responds even with a rebuke. Look at verse 27. I already told you, he said. You didn't listen. What? Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? The irony of that's there is that he is moving towards more and more sight. They're going more and more into blindness. I've told you, I'm telling you again and again. Do you want to become his disciples too? And we see now him standing his ground, bringing even overwhelming facts when he is pressed even more. This whole thing is a trial of his testimony here. Look at verse 32. The man says, throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. And I just love the logic here. Grammatically, he brings an argument. Like where it's tightly constructed. God, he says God does not hear sinners, which is a general principle, right? And he says this man has performed a healing that cannot be questioned. And he points to a specific fact. And he's like, I'm exhibit A of that. And therefore, this man must be from God. He comes to a necessary conclusion. This is not just naive enthusiasm. It is careful, but we're seeing him actually coming down, and he is speaking more and more clearly about Jesus. And the Pharisees are getting more and more blind. They accuse him of this. You were born, look at verse 34, you were born entirely in sin. How condescending is that? Like as if they were not. But yet, if you go, David says in Psalm 51, in sin my mother conceived me. And literally all of us are part of what? The Adam's family, right? Like we have sinned, and sin shows up in all different ways. In us. We're weird in some way, right? And you see, and it says that, are you trying to teach us? Are you trying to teach us? And even they double down, we are disciples of Moses. We don't want to be his disciples. We're disciples of Moses. Even when Jesus in John 5 had said that Moses had actually pointed to me. But they would rather stay with the old, and they don't want to embrace the person Moses had said is coming. But I love just another act of grace here. Jesus doesn't leave him to figure all these things out by himself. It says in verse 35, and Jesus heard that he had been thrown out of the synagogue, right? He had been thrown out. It cost him now communally. He couldn't go to a place that he would go to worship. And he found him. And he asked, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And he asked. It shows that he's still he can't see very clearly yet. And Jesus answered, you have seen him. In fact, I just love that. You have seen him. You couldn't see him before, but now you can see him. Why? Because Jesus has done something, right? In fact, he is the one speaking to you, with you. And I love how he ends. I believe, Lord. Right? And he worshipped him. This is the part where if you were queuing up music right here, it would be like, I can see clearly now. The rain is good, right? This is it right here. Like there will be a soundtrack right there, and because he can finally see Jesus for who he is. And when he sees Jesus for who he is, what does he do? He calls him Lord. It's cost him everything. He's been excommunicated from he's been thrown out from the Jewish community and the temple, but now he is just like that sheep, like we're gonna see in John chapter 10, where Jesus says the sheep that's been cast out, I'm gonna come and redeem, and I'm gonna find. Like here, we're getting to see Jesus comes to him, and we see sight reaching its goal in worship. His sight now ends with a confession and worship. And within that, I just love, first of all, he calls him sir, right? And then he calls him Lord. It's the same Greek word for Lord. It's an identical form, but it now has different weight. Not because the vocabulary has changed, but because the faith behind it has actually changed. At one point, he is saying, who is he, sir? Who is he? He is still in darkness in some way. But then when he says, I am he who's standing in front of you, he falls and he worships. Why? Because he can finally see him for who he is. You know what happens when you walk from darkness, like into bright sunlight, right? You don't see everything instantly first, right? You squint, you adjust, and not only that, you don't go back inside, you stay in the light, and gradually everything sharpens. And that is what we see with this blind man. The people press him. Who did this? And how did it happen? He doesn't have all the answers. He says it's a man named Jesus, and that's it. And then he stays in the light. And then next he calls him a prophet. Then he stays in the light. And the next he defends him because the Pharisees like are pressing him. And then until finally when he meets him, he sees him as Lord. He didn't have it all figured out from the beginning. And that's what trust in Jesus does. It doesn't give you everything at once. It keeps giving, and every small step of obedience and every costly confession, it might get you kicked out in some communal circles, but your sight continues to grow more and more and more. Trust in Jesus produces sight that keeps growing. And that is why Paul confidently says when he's talking about proclaiming Jesus, it's not going to be up there. He says this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5 to 6. And this is one of the reasons why I love preaching the gospel, because the power doesn't hinge on me. He says this, for we are not proclaiming ourselves. Like if you follow the gospel because of a certain speaker, then you're following it for the wrong reasons. We're not proclaiming ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, right? And ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake, for His glory. For God who said, let light shine out of darkness, has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. And we see that playing out in this passage here. How is this meant to influence how we think? We are meant to always appreciate this idea that growing sight is the normal pattern of real faith. Growing sight, it's a normal pattern of real faith. And this is what Proverbs 4:18 says. It's not going to be up there, but hear me read it. It says this, the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, right? Shining brighter and brighter until midday. If you were to find an illustration of that, it is this man here. This man is healed, and he's giving us a full picture of discipleship where he is healed by Jesus. He's questioned by the world. He's questioned by the religious establishment. He is faithful under pressure. He is cast out from, it's costly to him. He's cast out from these circles, and then he is fully received by Jesus. Jesus finds him again, and he gains full sight. And what is this meant to help us with? It should produce courage in us. Pressure may clarify faith rather than discourage it and destroy it. That pressure, even right now, the pressure you are facing, it is not designed to destroy your faith. Many times it's designed to clarify your faith. Is there pressure or interrogation you're facing today? Right now, that might be clarifying what you actually believe rather than destroying it. And there's a moment where you say, yes, I believe. But the day of testing is going to come. And that day of testing, when look, if you kind of just look at this passage and you see if this man was a frog in a lab, he is being prodded and he's been dissected. Tell us again and again and again what happened, how did it happen, and all that. The pressure is there, but it is all meant to actually clarify. And the more the pressure is there, the more he sees clearly and more clearly. Right. In fact, maybe this is what the writer of James says, that when he's saying consider it pure joy when you enter into trials. Why? Because your view of Jesus when you entered into that tunnel is going to be different when you come out of it. Because you're going to trust Him a little bit more. You're going to know that He meets you where you are, at the bottom of, at rock bottom. And you are going to know that He is a high priest who sympathizes with every one of your weaknesses. And you're going to know that every temptation, every struggle, every battle, every single one of those, you cannot stay down there. You are going to know that He is the one who has the power of resurrection, and that power of resurrection is still available for you. All you have to do is to be faithful under pressure. You got married and you said it for better, for worse, and the worst came. And usually we want to press eject instead of actually saying, okay, the worst has come. And you promised that you were going to keep us in this. you had children, and it was so beautiful when you took those pictures, and little Timmy was an angel and all those things, and then depravity showed up, and you could see that he was born in sin just like you were. And in fact, it's even more discouraging when you see that it is actually your sin. Have you ever tried to discipline your child and you realize you're disciplining yourself? Like, you just know, this is what I was like. Like, it's just me, and you start realizing, wow, you've been gracious with me, Lord. Hey, you better send that text message to your parents and you say, thank you. You didn't tell me this was this hard, right? Under pressure, it's easy to run and find help somewhere else. But we're called to still find help in the Lord. And you're meant to have a stubborn faith that says, I'm not going to go to the hills. Like, I've placed my faith in Jesus. Psalm 11 says, how can you say to me, flee like a bird to the mountain, somewhere else? No, I'm going to go. I've placed my refuge in Him. And I'm going to stay with Him. Maybe the call here would be, take the next step with what you already see. Where are you on the blind man's trajectory? He says he's a man called Jesus, he's a prophet, and he says, Lord, I believe at the end. And this is what Psalm 119 verse 130 says, the revelation of your words brings light and gives understanding to the inexperienced. Just as the word comes, it brings light. And in fact, that's why we wake up every single day. If you think you see, usually it means you're even more blind. But we wake up with that dependence of saying, Lord, I'm still blind to this thing. Help me to see. Let's look at the next trajectory here. Rejecting Him deepens a willful blindness. It deepens a willful blindness. The Pharisees see increasingly poorly, right? Every act of rejection, however religious, right? They start first with the Sabbath, however religious, however confident. We know you cannot teach us. We are disciples of Moses. It moves them further from the light until they pronounce the verdict on themselves. And first we see that the miracle divides them. Right, and we see, look again in verse 16. Some of the Pharisees say, this man is from God, is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others were saying, how can a sinful man perform such signs? And there was division amongst them. And I love that word division. It's schisma in Greek. It's used a lot in John's gospel, but it's actually speaking of the fact that light came into a dark world and divided divided darkness. And not only that, it's a literally marker here that actually just talks about the fact that Jesus' presence creates a way in which neutrality is not possible. You're either on the I'm accepting, or you're on the side where you're totally rejecting. Neutrality is impossible. The Pharisees who dismiss him on Sabbath grounds are not being careful. They're choosing a category over a person. And we see the miracle divides them, and they're kind of left astounded. And you can see they're in the fog. They're driving in the fog for a while, and they bring even the parents as well. And the parents want to stay within the circles, right? I want to say, and we see them even when they're pressed in that trial, and they say that ask him, right? Ask him. And we see even him here, John using the parents' evasion to show that the cost of discipleship is not merely just theological, but it is also communal as well. The question of Jesus divides. And we're seeing it's dividing, even it's got communal implications, even familial implications here. But what we see, and this man holds on to his confession. When verse 25 he says, whether or not he's a sinner, I do not know. But one thing I do know is that I was blind, but now I can see. I love that word, one thing I know. It's a deliberate placement here in the book of John. And because what he says is that this is what I know. But the Pharisees repeat the same word in verse 24 and in verse 29. They say, we know. We know that we know we're disciples of Moses. We know we're stuck in our own religious in our religious kind of like a belief. And the man does not contest their knowledge. He simply plants a single undeniable fact next to it. His knowing is experiential and it's also very concrete. And theirs is religious. And then at the end of the day, it becomes a self-ceiling. Becomes a ceiling where they cannot rise higher than that. And Jesus eventually pronounces judgment on them. Look at verse 39. When they persist in that, he says this, and this is where our central idea came from. I came into this world for, what is the reason? For judgment. In order that those who do not see, those who recognize their need for sight, who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. Jesus' statement here, it reverses the expected logic. In Jewish expectation, their judgment would clarify and vindicate the righteous. That's why they were strict with the law. And they were always looking down on everyone, saying, we can't wait for him to come. Judgment is coming and all of you are going to be destroyed. But here, judgment operates as though a revelation itself, the very presence of the light of the world, both illuminates and then it also exposes those who admit. And Jesus here now he judges there. He says those who admit blindness gain sight, and those who claim the sight prove that they are actually even more blind. And in fact, this is actually like what the end game looks like even in the Gospel of John. The last judgment is already happening in every encounter with Jesus. Jesus, the light of the world, he gives sight to the blind and he blinds those who have sight. And their own question even exposes them. Look at verse 40. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard that these things, and they asked him, we are not blind too, are we? And then Jesus says, if you were blind, Jesus told them, you wouldn't have sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. And it's very conditional here. And it's very significant. If you were blind, you will have no sin. And Jesus is not saying ignorance excuses sin. He is saying that their sin consists precisely in their confident claim of sight while standing in the presence of the light of the world himself. They're claiming to have sight. And that word, that verb remain, like, and you see it used even later on in John 15, like it is a special, it's a most loaded word. And here it describes not abiding in blessing, that like if you are in Jesus, you are abiding, you're connected to the vine, and your life will bear fruit, and fruit that will remain. You abide in Jesus, you abide in the blessed man himself, and you become like a tree that is planted by the streams of living water, right? But if you resist Jesus, now you are abiding in judgment. That's what's happening here. And the Pharisees, we see them using that word. We know. And you've tried to correct your child before, or someone, and then as soon as you say, hey, well, why don't you do this? And they're like, I know. And usually that's like if you were watching Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi would say, your cup is too full. That's what's happening here. Your cup is too full, so therefore there is no more that can be added into your cup anymore. Right. And here, Jesus declares that they are blind. And we see here the formerly blind man uses the same word, and he turns it back on them. Right, I was blind. I know I was blind, but now I see. But the Pharisees move from, and I want you to see the progression of blindness here. They move from investigation to hostility, and then eventually to expulsion. They expel this man, and even all the way to condemnation. We are disciples of Moses. No one can teach us anything. We are the ones who teach here. Their blindness is not a lack of religion, but a refusal to admit their need. And they see Jesus is standing in front of them. This reminded me of what Helen Keller, an American author, who lost both her sight and hearing before she was 2 years old. She spent years locked in a dark, silent world with no way to communicate. And until a teacher who broke through and everything changed. She went on to write so many books. And when she went on to graduate college, write books, and spend a life advocating for others. And someone bluntly asked her one time, "Isn't it terrible for you to be blind?" And this is what she responded. And I hope this is going to be useful for you and I this morning. Better to be blind and see with your heart than to have two good eyes and see nothing. That is the Pharisees in one sentence. They had every advantage, the scriptures, the training, at the front row seat of the most remarkable miracle anyone has ever witnessed, and they saw nothing. They saw nothing, not because they couldn't, but just because they wouldn't. That's what my dad used to say, my mom used to say. She would say that like, you just want because you can't, or you just want because you just want. Like just approaching my stubbornness. And this is meant to change our mind and recognize that sometimes the dangerous thing, church, I want you to hear me, the most dangerous thing, religious activity is not the same as spiritual sight. We can be stuck in knowing, doing, and all those things. And this week, there was a trial that just proved exactly that. Religious activity, or even religious insight. And this should produce a sober examination, not superiority. It should produce a sober examination, and so that as we step over the table, and we're going to start serving here, communion here very soon, and as we step over the table, I just hope you are actually also as well examining yourself the same way those disciples would examine themselves. Is it I? Is there a way in which I've become comfortable in my own blindness. And what you're meant to do this morning is to trade your blindness daily. And let your testimony continue to say, I was blind, but now I see. Why? Because the path of the righteous is like the rising sun. It keeps getting brighter and brighter and brighter. So the question here is this: is your theology currently producing worship, or is it producing a system that gives you confidence without dependence? Because we can be so confident without dependence. And maybe now another question would be, can you point to a specific, to something specific Christ has done in your life that no argument can take away from you? Your own one thing I know. What is it? And can you point to that thing even in this last week where you can say, he has met me where I am? So, church, we have seen the light of the world come to a man who could not find his way to him. And we have seen trust grow into worship. And we've seen rejection harden into blindness. But John 9 doesn't end in this story. I want you to hear me this morning. It doesn't end with this story. It sets a stage for it. The light of the world kept walking towards the cross. And where he took the guilt, the blindness, the condemnation of sinners on himself, and the same hands that made mud off the ground and pressed it against the blind man's eyes were now stretched out on a Roman crossbeam and nailed to the wood. And he did not stay there. He rose from that grave, proving that sin was paid for, death was defeated, and all who trust in him will one day see God. They will have sight that will see God, and every sin that put him on that cross has been paid for in full. Every blind eye that trusts in him will one day see the face of God. Every grave that holds one of his sheep is only temporary. He reigns even today. He is risen triumphantly. And what is he doing today? He still gives sight to the blind. And the blind man's testimony was enough here. He says, I was blind, but now I see. And I hope that is your testimony as well. Would you trust him this morning? Let me pray for us. Jesus, thank you for your goodness over us. Thank you that, Lord, you are the one who meets us in our blindness. But, Lord, you do not leave us where we are. But, Lord, I'm asking that you would come and you would remove every obstacle within us that would oppose your work of opening our eyes. Even 2 Corinthians 4 says that the devil has blinded the minds of unbelievers. But thank you, Lord, that you have conquered even him. And so today, Lord, may you continue to give us sight. And Lord, I pray that every day moving forward will not be a day of settling in our blindness, but will be a day of continuing to see clearly, because you, the light of the world, is with us. It's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Everybody say it. Amen.